supposing, you're very much about the more classical liberal version of social justice and not the postmodernist version, you can't have it without the truth. You can't have it without operating on the truth. And this is why I generally have dislike of activists, is that there's a tendency not to focus on the truth at all when there's activism involved, but rather on whatever narrative suits you best. So unless you've been hiding under a rock or not paying attention to the news or Twitter or anything like that, you're probably aware of events going on at the University of Columbia. I think it's Columbia University is actually the correct name, excuse me. Along with other universities with protests, but also with encampments, with other things going on like that. And I have hesitated to discuss that mostly because it's currently, at the time of this recording, ongoing, and I prefer to let some of these things play out before I make any remarks on it. But I did want to get back more toward some of the important things with this. And again, why do I talk about universities? Well, it's where we train the next generation of scientists, right? And there's a point that I want to make in this to remind folks, because there's something important here that matters, that I think is perhaps being missed, in that the pursuit of the truth, pursuit of knowledge, which is supposed to be the purpose of a university, is what my concern is. There we go, is the best way I could put it at this point, in all of these things. And so, but to do that, this is why free speech and academic freedom is a must and a requirement on a university campus. And that is because, we have our different biases, we have our different opinions on different things, and, we go about things and doing experiments and analyses and, debates and what have you in different ways. And it is only through that back and forth that, well, you're wrong about that this way and here's why and all this other kind of stuff, that you can possibly get at that pursuit of the truth effectively, with knowledge there. As they mentioned in the In Defense of Merit article, this is one of the things they actually mentioned in there, and I've harped on ad nauseum. And so I want to read a couple of things here, hopefully keep this video brief, but if not, such is the case. Because of course, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression has been very much watching things going on. And, I'm not even going to comment with regard to the nature of the events and, take a side on that. That's not my point with this. Not what I'm intent on doing. I can say I have some very expressed disagreements with certain things going on and certain messages that have been said, but that's actually not the point here. The point is more so about what you can and cannot do on a university campus as relates to free speech and academic freedom. But more importantly, today, the point is about what does this mean? What does this all mean as we're training the next generation of scientists, regardless of exact issues at play that cause such kinds of events to unfold at a university campus? So this came recently, and this is reprinted in the Unsafe Science Substack with permission from FIRE, and Unsafe Science, of course, is Lee Jussam's Substack. He's the Dark Fiddling Pirate on Twitter, and I highly encourage you to follow him because he is a fun follow. In this, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, recently issued a statement about what is and is not protected speech as part of protests. I reprinted it here in full after receiving permission. Yesterday, FIRE released the below statement regarding the protests spreading across America's campuses. We are aware that things developed overnight and are continuing to develop in real time, and as always, our team is monitoring the situation closely. These are incredibly hard times. FIRE's North Star is the First Amendment, and as such, we are focused on clarifying the lines between protected and unprotected speech. reminding colleges and universities of their duty to protect expressive rights and the physical safety of campus members, and defending those whose rights are violated. Oops. Fire is monitoring outbreaks of violence and arrests on campuses nationwide. Sadly, we must restate a bedrock principle. Violence is never acceptable. Colleges and universities must ensure the swift arrest of anyone engaging in violence on campus, whether committed by students or visitors. Violence thus far appears to have been isolated, but things can change at any moment, and it must be made clear that any violence is unacceptable. Institutions must provide meaningful security and take prompt action to separate groups when tensions flare. For everyone's safety, and to secure expressive rights for all, no one on campus should have any sense whatsoever that violence will be tolerated or excused. While the First Amendment protects a great deal of expression, fire again emphasizes that it is not without boundaries. True threats and incitement to violence, as defined by the Supreme Court, are not protected. Neither is discriminatory harassment, targeted conduct that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it denies the targeted student access to an educational opportunity or benefit. And when protesters surround opposing speakers and otherwise prevent students from freely moving around campus, they cross a line separating protected expression and unprotected misconduct. Peaceful protest is generally protected, and colleges and universities must ensure students can engage in peaceful protest on campus. But we remind students that engaging in civil disobedience may result in punishment, including arrest. Civil disobedience derives its expressive power from the willingness of participants to accept the consequences of breaking the rules. That willingness illustrates their intensity of feeling. Students occupying campus spaces in violation of reasonable, content-neutral rules risk punishment. When that punishment is viewpoint neutral, proportional, and in keeping with past practice, it does not violate expressive rights. We likewise remind administrators and law enforcement that institutional responses must be measured. Peaceful protest must not be met with violence simply because of the viewpoints expressed. This is an extraordinarily difficult moment for students, faculty, administrators, alumni, and the public. Tensions are high and nerves are raw. The charity and grace necessary for productive dialogue are in vanishingly short supply, and it can be difficult to separate protected expression from its opposite. Amidst this intense pressure, our nation's institutions of higher education must lead the way by acting decisively to defend protected speech while preventing violence. Colleges and universities can preserve the safety and stability required for the discussion across differences that they are uniquely equipped to facilitate. And then Lee just says here that actually two of his former graduate students are actually now research scientists at FIRE, which is Sean Stevens and Nate Honeycutt over there. Let's see. In academia, prestige flows to people whose students get academic jobs, even though academia mostly runs on prestige, and even though I am willing to exploit prestige games to advantage the given opportunity, I consider it mostly bullshit. In this context, I could not be more proud of Sean and Nate. Well, awesome. That's sweet. So, that's FIRE's statement on everything going on university campuses right now with respect to protests, but also civil disagreement. And it is actually quite a correct statement on the legalities of it, and I'm not going to disagree with that. There are time, place, and manner restrictions when you're on a university campus for what is acceptable speech, and whether your students and faculty recognize it or not is a different thing, but there are student codes of conduct and faculty codes of conduct that are at play, and you are expected to comply with all of them. And when you don't, punishment is meted out, so long as it is done so in a neutral way, like you're not favoring one group over another. In this case, you're acting based upon the actions of the person who is responsible for whatever misconduct, as it were. Then you are excuse me one moment. You are quite well within your rights for that punishment. And even though things are said that are extremely vile, they got the right to say it as a protest, but you don't necessarily have the right to prevent people from getting around the campus. You don't have the right to prevent access to buildings. You don't have the right if you're engaging in a protest to do all sorts of other things that would impinge upon the rights of others. And the same goes for university campus, and also, again, time, place, and manner restrictions, student code of conduct restrictions, and what have you. That all matters here in this kind of thing. And the reason it matters is it's because it's designed in part to help us facilitate the dialogue that we need to get around the truth as a reality-based community, and particularly for universities whose purpose is the pursuit of the truth, the pursuit of knowledge. Not social justice activism, not any kind of activism really, is not supposed to be the purpose of a university. Now, yes, I know folks can argue that, fine, whatever. That's where I stand on that, and that's where it has traditionally been for universities many times over in the past, that they are about to the pursuit of knowledge. And the pursuit of knowledge requires a commitment to allowing different opinions and debating and different perspectives. And as Jane and I talked about on the Rogue Journal Club recently, there are vast benefits to the knowledge pursuing enterprise, as it were, if there is ideological diversity on a campus, or in a discipline, or in any group of people, really. There's actually a vast benefit to that. But that benefit can't be had if there is civil disobedience and misconduct from anybody that upends that. And that's the simple notion of where it is. And I am thankful that there are some faculty that recognize that. This is actually from the Columbia Academic Freedom Council on recent events. It was published earlier this week. I think they're wrong on one thing in particular, but that is the thing here. To just a moment read this. The Columbia Academic Freedom Council condemns in the strongest possible terms the harassment and intimidation of Jewish students that has pervaded our campus. We strongly support the rights of faculty and students to think, write, publish, teach, as well as speak and demonstrate peacefully, regardless of how controversial or painful their views may be perceived to be. But these rights do not include the right to silence others through disruption and intimidation. We therefore urge the administration to enforce its own rules governing time, place, and manner protests in a fair, content-neutral, and sustained manner. We urge the administration to act decisively with due process protections and in consultation with the University Senate to restore safety and a culture of mutual respect, as these are the only conditions in which free expression can thrive. This is one of the things. Respect is an important matter here in that you may disagree very contentiously with somebody on anything. But, you actually still recognize that it's a person you're talking to. And mutual respect is one of the things that makes a university function when you're talking about such divergent views and opinions. We also call on our faculty colleagues and all members of the Columbia community to de-escalate tensions and join forces in navigating the challenges ahead. One important long-term challenge is education. We endorse President Shafiq's declaration that education is our most powerful tool and her stated commitment to viewpoint diversity. Looking ahead to the next academic year, we support efforts to expand courses and programs that teach strategies for responding to disagreements with curiosity, respect, and humility. A second key challenge is upholding the values of academic freedom, independence from interference, and academic self-governance. We urge Columbia leadership to be resolute in defending these values when contending with critics from inside the university or from the outside. It is only by adhering to these principles that we can ensure the rights of students and faculty to engage in vigorous advocacy outside the classroom, short of a specific incitement to violence, even if they hold extreme or objectionable views. We hope that our community can quickly de-escalate tensions and reunite around our common values of learning, kindness, and humanity. So this is signed off on by the co-chairs of Columbia's Academic Freedom Council. And I read that just to make the point in that I'm thankful to see some faculty reminding folks of this kind of thing and sticking to their principles in that, though I do think that they are wrong in one aspect that short of specific incitement to violence, no, actually, time, place, and manner restrictions with respect to code of conduct, as you saw from Fire's statement, apply here also, in that Columbia can enforce the rules with respect to that if they so choose. Now, I do want to wrap up with this, again, to get back to the point. here with all of this, because I'm looking at all of this myself in the context of what does it mean when we're talking about the next generation of our students. Next generation students, well, our current students, our next generation of professionals. And for that, I want to come over here real quick. So if you're not watching it, you should. It's a Wednesday show called Is That True? With Deb Philman and Kieran White, both of whom friends of this channel, have appeared on this channel before. And they actually did a great job breaking down the legal issues with this and talking about whether or not in this situation are these things actually legal, or are they illegal, or are they violations of code of conduct, all those kinds of things. Just talking about that, regardless of whether or not you agree with one side or the other. And the same thing goes for me in this, regardless of whether or not you think of one side or the other is right. And there's a couple of comments here that Deb is making with regards to the code of conduct for faculty, or the ethical code of conduct here, and the administrative code of conduct for the faculty of Columbia University, that I think actually just also applies more broadly. So this is going to be a minute or so, or a couple of minutes, I think. And I just want to let Deb have her commentary here, and I'm going to follow up on the back end with this. So hopefully this works.
This is the statement of ethical conduct in the administrative code of conduct. And obviously it says that they're, expects officers of instruction, research, blah, 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 highest standards of ethical conduct.
I will say, just to add to it, what Deb just read there is pretty much a standard thing for a lot of different universities. A lot of them have faculty codes of conduct, of which there are some things very similar.
Be honest, ethical, and truthful. Well, it's not honest, ethical, or truthful to say that these students are just engaging in a peaceful protest. That is observably false. So you're already lying. They obey the law. They've been ordered to disperse, just like the students. They're not complying, so they are not following the law.
I should say there was some context to this section here, that one of the things that Deb and Kieran were talking about right before this is the faculty who have since joined some of the protests, and in some of the other events as well. So,
and then when we get down to the respect for governance, well, now we're talking about the policies that Kieran read off to you from the school. And this is the expectation that members of the Columbia community will act in compliance with the laws, regulations, and policies that are in effect and govern behavior at the university and conduct of university business. Demonstrably are not doing that. If they're going to form a ring around the students, protect the students, walk out of their jobs, leave work without permission, without saying like, I'm taking a leave of absence or taking a vacation and whatever. But if they're going to go and join in what is they're saying now, well, we're just joining in the peaceful protest, but you're joining in what has already been deemed not just a peaceful protest by the administration. So if it was day one and the kids were just standing around going, we shall not be moved, and we're supporting a ceasefire, and we're just going to be singing peaceful songs, and they started arresting them, and the instructors went out and said, we're going to stand here and defend the rights of our students to protest, I'd be with them. Even though I disagree with the protest, I'd be like, they're right. But that's not what they've done. They've waited until police have shown up to disperse, and they haven't complied, and they're disrespecting, and they're harassing, and they're spitting, and they're doing all these violations.
I will say this has actually been documented in news reports, that these kinds of things have happened around these particular events on campus. So that's just to add to that point that Deb is making, that has happened. And it has also been the case that the Columbia administration has deemed it an unlawful, it's not unlawful, but they've deemed that it's not actually a protest. And so that moves the legal levers, if you will, for them to act upon it. And they have been negotiating to get that particular event shut down, as it were. So just to add context to that for those who are not familiar.
And now the faculty comes out.
Right.
So the faculty is as guilty, in my opinion, as the students. And of course it goes on, but we've already gone into this.
I think they're facilitators at this point, and definitely accomplices in whatever transpires with this. They are definitely...
Not everybody. That's the only point I want to make, just because of the other one I saw from the Columbia Academic Freedom Council. This is not every professor, for sure. Just to make that point. Gary's not necessarily wrong, but just to make my own point.
They've got blood on their hands as well of whatever happens with this.
Absolutely.
Without their appeasement, nothing could happen.
That's right.
It's
And I
they
just think
have all the
it's
power.
going to be very interesting to see what happens from this point forward, because as you pointed out, optics do matter. They've waited quite a while. I mean, they've waited long enough to and it's worth noting there are quite a few tenured professors on the campus who are, in my personal opinion, violating not just their own employment and everything, but they're violating the law and encouraging unlawful behavior. And they've got some real problems. They've got some real problems at Columbia in particular, but also NYU, also all these other universities, and that they've let it go on for so long, probably because of cowardice, like you pointed out. But they got some real problems. And we, by extension,
this is the point Deb is about to get into that I want to follow on the back end, in that, yeah, there's some distinct problems going on here with university professors. Again, not everybody, but distinctly some problems going on related to this. But Deb's about to follow on the back end here.
American people / people of the West, many of whom use American universities for their kids, we have a serious problem if they get this wrong, they being the schools, because these are the young adults who are going to be the future leaders and representatives and law enforcement officers and judges and lawyers and doctors and scientists and all the people that are going to run our world and occupy our world. And if we don't get this right and we don't send a message to what I believe are the majority who don't condone this behavior and don't want this new world.
Okay. Here's the final note with that, because Deb hit the nail on the head with what I have been concerned about with this as I have been watching. The university professors and the like have to recognize something, because whether they see it or not, whether they're not used to it or not, when you're an undergraduate and you go onto a university campus, the professors are high and mighty above you. A lot of times you revere them. You might be a little scared of them. All of those kinds of things. Been there, done that as an undergrad. And as a grad student, after all. You end up being a little afraid of them at times. But they also look up to you. Those students do look up to you as a professor oftentimes, and particularly if you're a good professor, a well-known professor, good teacher, all those kinds of things, that they tend to look up to you. So what does it say to them? What does it say to the students when it is the professors, the vaunted truth seekers, the vaunted knowledge pursuers that students have come to learn from, so that they may themselves either go do the same thing or also themselves, go off into other professions and disciplines where, they may be a doctor, maybe helping somebody, maybe another scientist, solving the world's problems, maybe an engineer, building some infrastructure, building bridges, maybe become a lawyer, any number of different kinds of things. What does it say to them when they see professors doing this, engaging in some similar behavior, or at the very least, not setting the standard themselves? And I'm not saying make giant statements or anything like that, but even just in the way you are acting and behaving on campus. Well, what are you going to do when these students come back? Because let's face it, we're here at the end of April in 2024. Finals time is right around the corner for students with their final exams and what have you. Okay, if this carries on to the point where students miss their exams, well, what are you going to do with their grades? Because one of the main things about the truth-seeking part of science is accountability when you screw things up. And being responsible for your own work, for your own research, for your own work. And so the question, of course, that I have with this is, are we, at this moment teaching some accountability to our next generation of scientists, that this is not appropriate conduct necessarily if you want to engage. Protest is fine. Again, protest is utterly fine. I'm talking about the other stuff. That it's not appropriate conduct, that it might actually very much be misconduct in the eyes of universities. So think of some of these students who may themselves want to go on and be university professors. Are you going to be teaching them anything about what's appropriate conduct on a university campus? What isn't appropriate conduct on a university campus? All of those different kinds of things. Where is that being taught? And the other thing here is, as Deb has talked about with this, as you're thinking about it, this is why the focus of a university has to be on the pursuit of the truth, and with the mutual respect given and enforcing those codes of conduct, regardless. Again, free speech, absolutely. You can protest however you like. You can say whatever you like, all those kinds of things within certain limits. Because as Fire has talked about itself many times, First Amendment protects a great deal of expression, but true threats, and incitement to violence, as defined by the Supreme Court, are not protective. Neither is discriminatory harassment, targeted conduct that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it denies the targeted student access to an educational opportunity or benefit. And when protesters surround opposing speakers or otherwise prevent students from freely moving around campus, they ought cross the line separating protected expression and inappropriate and unprotected misconduct. There has to be the accountability there. In any case where a protest crosses the line to something else. And that's regardless of the nature of the issue. I don't really give a damn what the issue is in question that's come up, that's caused protests to arise. That's the rule with that has to be enforced. Why? Because if you're going to go after the truth, then you have to be held accountable when there is misconduct there. And I've said it before, people need to stop and think about this, because we in our society now place a high value on scientists, doctors, and things like that to be experts in things when we need them to be, and to provide their advice and guidance. This doesn't necessarily help with the trust of the public in scientists and professionals when there is not the accountability and the measured respect for different groups, as well as more focus on that pursuit of the truth and respect for ideological diversity that needs to be there for the benefit of all. Because Randy said this during the last Side Chat Saturday, and it stuck with me. So supposing, you're very much about the more classical liberal version of social justice and not the postmodernist version, you can't have it without the truth. You can't have it without operating on the truth. And this is why I generally have dislike of activists, is that there's a tendency not to focus on the truth at all when there's activism involved, but rather on whatever narrative suits you best. And so this is where I have to say with that, in the accountability factor here for students and faculty alike is part of truth seeking. Here, it is an important part of the truth seeking. And I actually pulled up, while I'm thinking about it, I pulled up that statement on ethical conduct here. And I will remind that for Columbia, this applies to just about everybody who is in a position of employment by the university. Here with all of this. So there's a lot of different things here, but there's also respect for governance. There's respect for others. Respect for others is the central principle that governs the interactions between people at Columbia University. Two primary expectations that flow from this principle are to act with civility and to refrain from abuse of power. Respect for others is expected in peer-to-peer relationships between service providers and people within and outside Columbia University, between people who are clients or customers and service providers of the university, and within a supervisory context. So people have the right to disagree, even strongly disagree. However, there is also a responsibility to be civil and maintain respect even when disagreeing. Problems, mistakes, and miscommunications can all arise from time to time in the course of business, and even and even call for the escalation of seriousness of attention to a situation. Again, there still remains an expectation of respect and civility in interactions. Respect for others includes a respect for those who are different from you. A positive working environment where everyone can receive respect and do their best work requires a respect and tolerance for difference and diversity. And that is actually what the pursuit of the truth requires too. You have to have respect for different ideological viewpoints. And I'm nervous that at least at some universities, that's being lost at times. And so there does need to be some accountability involved with respect for different opinions and for the pursuit of the truth. So, as always, all of this will be linked in the description for you. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.